So before we actually run our application, let's take a look at what we're actually going to see once our application is up and running and started. And I'll give you a warning now. This is not going to be exciting. What we get when we created an API, web API project is we get a single example controller, and it's called the values controller. And let's take a look at what's going on inside here. Now, an API controller always needs to have a root. How do we get to this particular controller? And the type of roots we're using inside our API controllers is what's referred to as attribute-based routing. These attributes, which are located above our controller in this case, specifies the routes that we need to use to access this particular controller. Now, the route itself is specified as API slash, and then this controller in the square brackets is really a placeholder, and this is replaced with the name of our controller or the first part of our controller, which in this case is called values. And if we take a look at the comment here, in order to get to this particular method, this particular API endpoint, then first of all it needs to be an HTTP GET request, which is specified in this particular attribute here. And we also need to specify API values to get here, because this HTTP GET doesn't specify any additional route parameters. So when we hit API slash values, which is just the root of our controller, then we're going to hit this particular method. Now there's another method inside here, another HTTP GET, and this time we do specify a route parameter, and in this case it's the ID. So when we hit a route of API slash values slash, in this case it's 5, but it could be any number, then this particular value is then available inside the parameter of our method here. And when we hit this particular API endpoint, what we're going to do is just return a single string called value. And when we hit this particular endpoint, we're going to return an array of strings, value 1 and value 2. Like I say, this is not going to be incredibly exciting, what we're going to look at now. But I just wanted to show you what we can expect to see when we make successful requests to our API endpoints at this stage of development. Obviously our application is going to be significantly more exciting than what we're looking at here, but this is what we've got to work with at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my terminal, and I'm just going to close all of these windows down just so I can show you the background of VS Code. And one of the things inside VS Code we get is an integrated terminal. And this is one of the advantages of using VS Code. I still don't think they've actually added one by default inside Visual Studio, thinking about it. I think you actually have to add an extension to Visual Studio in Windows to get an integrated terminal inside Visual Studio. Or at least that was the case in VS 2017. I've actually not used Visual Studio for some time, so it might be different now. But anyway, inside VS Code we definitely do have access to a terminal. And we can access this, in my case, on a Mac by using Control and apostrophe. It's probably slightly different for Windows, or then again it might not be. You have Control on Windows as well. So whatever the shortcut keys are for this toggle terminal, just use this to open up a terminal window. And what we're going to do is use the .NET CLI to actually run our application. And if we type in .NET Run into our terminal window and press return, we'll get an error because we're at the solution level here, and we need to tell .NET Run where our startup project is, and our startup project is the API project. So we need to tell it which project it is we want to run, and in this case it's going to be the API project. So I'll say .NET Run, and I'll add a switch of P, and I'll specify the API as our startup project in this case. And this goes ahead and runs our application, and we should find that we're listening on localhost 5000. So let's head over to our browser, and take a look at what we get when we hit localhost 5000. And we get this page cannot be found. But we're not running anything off the roots of localhost 5000. We actually need to specify the address of the API/values, which we know is a root that exists within our API controller. And if I go to API values, then rather excitingly, we can see the array of value 1 and value 2. And once you've recovered from the shock of excitement of seeing these two string values in your browser, then what we can also do is attempt to hit the second root, and just as excitingly, we get a string back called value. I know, it's not particularly exciting, but it does prove that our API is working now. So what we're going to do next is, rather than return this static string data to our browser, we're going to create a domain entity, and then we're going to create our database, and then we're going to extract these values from a database rather than returning just static strings. So what we'll look at next is creating our first domain entity.